Hi everyone, how's everybody doing? This is the final installment of the making of this painting, a COVID ICU. If you haven't checked the other two parts of the initialization and the modeling, then please do so. In this painting, we will be dealing with the finishing and all sorts of detailing methods. So stay tuned. So as you can see, this is the detailing process, and I'm not focusing on extreme details, but rather having suggestive details. So I'm trying to, perfect the shapes of each and every object. Here I'm trying to focus on the human beings or the patients that were there, and already thinking of light source a great deal. The color that you are seeing here is mostly the cool light, and the alternate shadow that you are seeing, the shadow that is in the underneath surface is actually very warm. So you can see there is a quite a big contrast between a whitish bluish highlight and against a very orangey or brownish shadow section. Here I'm focusing more on the detail. It's like doing multiple portraits in a painting. So in a painting like this, there are too many things, various medical equipments, as well as portraits, as well as drapery like the curtains, etc., and figures. So if you do a painting like these twice or thrice, you will learn a lot. Obviously there is no landscape in this, but there is an element of landscape because you have to create the atmospheric distance between the frontal objects as well as the distant objects. So you need to think about those as well. So it has all sorts of elements that needs to be taken care of. And this portrait is more or less done, but I'm doing the other parts such as the hands and etc. So again, it's following almost similar principle. The parts that are receiving cool light, because this is the bluish whitish light, and focusing on the shadows, and they are quite warm, as you can see, creating the fingers, etc. And these people, you need to understand that they're very sick, because the person that I'm painting is comparatively older, near about 50s, somewhere in between 50s. So I think you need to show them that they're really sick, and the treatment, it wasn't easy. It was mostly on BiPAP. So you can say that the details are there, and now I'm creating more highlight on top of the hospital shirts that they were given, and all the other figures need to be taken into consideration. And here this person is mostly under the shadow, and light is falling from the top section, so we need to be aware of that. So I'm trying to be very suggestive rather than too detailed here, because that is my style, and this is how I paint, even in landscapes as well as in a painting like this. And I'm here focusing too much on the reality of an object. If that is lost, then the objective is lost. And also on the chroma, as you can see, the colors are now becoming more and more saturated. Highlights are becoming saturated. So I'm painting the highlights very loud right now. and increasing the chroma as well, and also creating some shadows, etc. Here this person is on oxygen, so there is a mask. So it's just like creating an illusion of reality, and it has some illustrative qualities, because this is a scene I'm depicting, and it is just a snapshot, so it has an illustrative quality. So there is some room for sketchiness as well, rather than having a too much detail. But since this is a painting, so we are painting in color, so there are a lot of concepts behind this painting, and some of them derived while I was doing the painting itself. And here I'm doing the hospital bed, which is like a still life, and you can see how loosely I started. And this is the barrier so that the patients don't fall off the bed, because they hardly had any strength whatsoever. This is the first round of COVID, you can understand. There were experimental treatments, and this person is on oxygen and also BiPAP in some other cases. And I was given the BiPAP, and it was very hard for a young man, so think about that when it's put on an old person. And here is some highlight. You can see how loosely it was painted. All I need to create is the illusion of reality, and that's it. There's nothing more to it. And you need to think about the surface that you're painting. A plastic barrier must look like a plastic one. A cloth should look like a cloth. A wall should look like a wall. So that's how I painted here, and that is how it should be. And a lot of people paint the clouds, etc. in the landscape very rough, and there is no problem with that, but it doesn't look like that, very roughly painted, etc. So it's mostly actually appears flat. Some teachers will say that you should paint it rough because you have to maintain the harmony, whereas some people will tell you that it doesn't look real because it's doesn't appear like that. You can paint the clouds roughly, but cannot paint a sky very roughly because it appears actually flat. Here you can see that I'm painting the machinery underneath the bed very roughly. There is hardly any detail whatsoever. It's just an illusion. And I'm also increasing the chroma. You have seen the blue side. I'm using Phthalo Blue as well as ultramarine. Is quite saturated when it's used with lesser amount of white. And here adjusting this figure a little. Now we are moving to this person. All of them are oxygen. This person was just trying to sit for a while. Very little strength. And here finishing the bed as well. Just a little dark patch. And here I'm focusing on the bed. You can see how loosely it was painted, even while I am looking at it right now after painting it at that point of time. And these beds are multi-purpose beds. You can lower them, you can recline them, and there are a lot of advantages. And this is the handle through which you would pull, and this is like made of plastic, so it must look like plastic. The white parts are made of plastic. Since this bed is receiving a huge amount of light, it's very well lit. You can see how loosely I'm painting. I'm just painting with a thinner bristle brush and just dragging and thinking about the angles and the parts that are receiving maximum amount of light. And this is the wheel underneath the bed, and it's going to receive very little amount of light, and we are going to perfect them and make them look realistic, but in this manner, in the suggestive manner, rather than having having to deal with too much detail and shifting the focus away from all the other important aspects. Now I'm doing it very carefully, looking at the source and thinking about them before putting any mark. That's why I'm painting very slowly. But the thing is that you paint faster while thinking about your brush strokes. If you put a wrong brush stroke, then you need to correct it, then you again go back and do the other things, and this is how it takes a lot of time. So if you think about your brush strokes before you put them on top of your canvas, obviously it's not easy at all, but think about the texture, think about the surface, and then I think it's going to be much more time saving rather than having to correct it again and again and again. So I think it's better that before you put your mark, think about all the aspects of that particular object that you're going to paint. Now you can see that I'm looking at the source, I'm looking at the stuff that I'm painting and how it can be created. All of these are wet paint, so I just dragged the wet paint over wet paint, and it collected some of the previous layers, collected and also deposited a new layer, and all I have is steel, and it just needs a highlight, which I will paint later. This is a highlight, and there is another one that I forgot. You can see that how easily I'm making these. These are not tough, but it'll look realistic once it's done. See, it's collecting the previous layers, and I just need to correct it a little, and that's it. And there is the wheel. This is a table in front of the patient. And again, you need to put the highlights. So this is how it's done, I think, in a suggestive painting. You just don't need to correct it too much. Just put a mark and think before you put a brush stroke. Now here I'm going to do a water bottle. You can see there was nothing, there was no drawing whatsoever. I'm just going through the shapes and thinking about which part is receiving more light, which parts are under shadow, which parts will have highlights. Since this is a transparent object, it is going to have a highlight in a different place. The highlights are mostly near the base, and that is what I am doing. It's not going to have a highlight just like a solid object. So this is now I'm at the refining stage. The main figure is getting refined, but it's again very loose. And if you see the painting up close, you will be surprised at how little detail was there. And I'm just increasing the highlights and thinking about the shapes and perfecting and correcting all the shapes. So this is all about refining. And first of all, this person is wearing a PPE suit, and so it needs to look like a plastic. or some kind of a plastic. So that is what I'm doing, and it has some reflective qualities. So you are seeing a lot of blue, browns, as well as violets, so and whites, shiny surfaces. And here I'm painting his hand, he's writing and thinking about uh, the highlights that it's going to receive. And look at the data that he's collecting. He's a senior doctor, and the data that is collecting and the papers, you can see how loosely it was done, but you can see where the highlights are at the binding of the pages, as well as at the end, and the middle section has a color, just slight amount of half tone darker than the whitish colors. So this is something that you need to understand. Here I'm putting black, and hands are one of the most difficult objects to paint, and you need to be watchful. And I think the hands, feet, these things need a lot of practice. If you do portraits, okay, portraits are tough, you need to make them look similar, but I think the hands are the real tough. I've read that Bogro used to do hands, drawing of the hands or painting of the hands for 3 hours before he started his day. So you can see that a master like that would spend so much time every day to perfect the hands, etc. So I think you need to spend some time with this. And you can see again, I'm doing another bed, and there was practically nothing. Now I'm trying to create the other furnitures, and this is a table that was given to me, and here the top part will have highlight because the light is coming from the top again, and it's going to have the shadow when the surface or surface breaks the shape. The shape changes, it'll have the shadows there and that's why there are some lighter parts after the shadowy sections. And here I'm working on the stand and a particular shape that I'm focusing on, and also the stand itself. I'm using a medium brush with a black paint to create the base of the table. I'm using bigger brushes and comparatively softer brushes as well, and just trying to get that edge, straight edge. And here I'm also focusing on the saturation, as I've mentioned earlier, and the saturation is of phthalo blue and ultramarine mixture, and you can see how blue it can get because on the top section. And here is some yellowness as well to counter that, because if you have put too much blue, then it needs to change a little. And here is the shadowy section. And this is actually a funny thing. This is just a banner. I think this is some kind of an ad or something. I'm not sure. I just focused on the shapes and of the ad or instructions, whatever it may be. So this is computer generated, so I'm just painting all the shapes very casually. There is no intention of doing any kind of detail, but just need to get that perspective right. And here is a monitor of some kind. I don't know about these things. This is just kept out of focus intentionally because I didn't want to focus everything. And here are some highlights, and we are going to rectify the shadowy line that I have, and it'll be done after the highlights are put. And there's a lot of interplay between burnt sienna and yellows and whites, so this has some sort of a color. And again, you will see a lot of cool light being placed. This is the cool light that I'm dealing with, and this is the light that was received. This is actually a reflected light obstructed by this this panel or whatever column. and it's getting the reflected light from the light source that I'm going to put later. Now I'm re-establishing the shadows and making a juxtaposition of all the elements, and this is the light source that I'm going to paint, and it's going to be very rough, but the shape will be correct. It's an oval shape, and just trying to create some sort of roughness so that it actually reflects the light, because everything is white and this is like super white, so you need to create some sort of a differentiation, and there is that reflected area. And this is something is called, I think, respirator. This was given to me, and mind you, this is going to be a very good tool if you have respiratory problems. And it has three round objects, and you need to blow them to pull them up or suck them, whatever, and it's going to exercise your lungs. And this is a very important tool. This was told to us again and again to do this thing, to work on this thing. And here again there are a lot of shadows, lot of reflected light, because there are three pipes inside. But at the moment I'm focusing on the rounded objects, and this is the highlight that I just put. And again focusing on which part is receiving more light, which part is not receiving light. So this has some amount of difficulty level, and there is a pipe that I need to create, and I don't think I'll be establishing that quite a big way. It's just one stroke, that's all. Maybe some attention was paid later on at the suction section. Here I'm fine-tuning the curtains, and curtains will have some shadowy areas underneath. And this part is actually made of a net, so the other section can be seen through that. And here is an edge created out of a palette knife, bigger palette knife that I had, edge between the ceiling and the wall. And again I'm going to do that on the other sections. Now I'm on to the switchboards. These are the panels, the wooden panels that were there for the switchboards. And now you will see a lot of color variation here, because I'm thinking about it, the highlights, etc., everything, and which part is going to receive the shadow. The shadows are going to be just underneath the highlights, and gradually they will fade. So, and also the squarish shape should be perfect. It cannot have the shape that you're seeing right now, overly shaped. It cannot have like that. You have to be a little bit careful about these sharp objects. All the four corners are very sharp. Now I'm perfecting the shapes before putting anything. There were a lot of plug points at that point, and internet connections and so on and so forth. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration. There is some footage that I lost, unfortunately, but there are some oxygen machinery that I captured, but I think I have lost them. But you will see some glimpses of them. And this is the monitors, and as you can see that there was practically nothing. I'm just creating it right there on a white surface. And think about this, if I make a mistake, then how would I be able to correct it? So I'm thinking very hard before putting any brushstroke whatsoever. There are a lot of monitors here, and everything look at least, every one of them must look at least realistic. And here is some guidance with the big figure in front and also the figures in the background, and the monitor is behind them. So there is some element of distance that I am also trying to create, and this is the shadow underneath, and shadow will have some variation. It will have cooler edges, and the main part is actually quite warm in the shadow. So I'm thinking very hard. If I need to correct it a little, I will do that with pure white, and I'm creating some sort of edginess, as well as creating shadows, that parts that are not receiving that amount of light. You can see I'm correcting the shadows a little as well. And here the shapes are very important. If you mess up the shapes, you need to correct. Don't leave a wrong shape anywhere in a painting. If you know that you have a wrong area, correct it. Here again, I'm dealing with the shapes. Now the lights are coming from the top, but they are not that far, so the shadows are near to the object. You can see it just messed a little, but I will correct it again. And this is more or less okay. I'm just creating the black background a little bit grayish, because this is in a distance. It's going to have some atmospheric perspective into it, so it's not 100% black. It's slightly gray, and with some white paint I am correcting the edges a little bit. Here I messed it up again. I need to correct it. So while doing architecture, these are going to be the most difficult because architecture is straight, and you need to create the variation of light. Here we don't have too much of architecture to deal with, so I think it'll be a good thing to paint a classical building just like the old masters, and have some figures in it, and some landscape in the background, and some water in front. I think it'll be a good education. Maybe you can copy some of the master work, and you will learn a lot from that. Here are some details that I'm painting, and here is the oxygen level, and there are various items. Here I just wrote. I had an idea to write off because it was on one of the machines, and so it teaches you that you're dealing with death and life here. So any moment it could be off. And here is a piece of paper that was written, and people would look at it. The medical fraternity, for their guidance. But the other things are made of plastic, the switchboards, etc. So I'm putting down the highlights and working with a very small dagger brush. While doing the details like this, you need to have certain brushes. First of all, a round bristle brush is going to be very useful, and it should be very thin, but it must have hairs in it so it remains stiff. And you need to have smaller daggers, because if you need to use it like a flat brush, then it's important to have smaller daggers. And also apart from these, you need to have some I think it is going to be useful. Some Filbert brushes made of nylon. Nylon brushes will not give you any, edges or rough edges. They are just like, painting with a very, what to say, a plasticky thing. But you will see its advantage when I will be doing the plugs here. When the switchboards are done, I will put the plugs in, and you will see the wires here. I'm using a nylon hair filbert, very small. You will see its advantage now. It's for a line, and these are quite useful. You can do them with a rigger as well, but I think a nylon filbert, thin nylon filbert is going to be more useful. But it's no harm to have rigor for, when you have to do the lines. So you need to have certain brushes for details, because this is not blocking, this is not modeling, this is something else. This is a different kind of beast to deal with. So, and it is going to take a long time. This is like finishing a building. When you start making a building, it's actually very easy to start that, and while you do the internal work, it takes more time, and it's like that. So you need to have time when you have a complexity of a piece like this, and you need to think about all the textures, all the things that you are going to paint and how you are going to paint. You can see I'm using the dabbing strokes for the piped oxygen. It needs to have that sort of a feel. I'm not painting them out. I'm just creating an illusion. That is my goal, and that is what I'm doing. The saline as well as oxygen and the oxygen controller, all of these things were painted. And here is the final line of highlight on my main figure. And it was quite roughly done. I mean, the final section is not videoed, I think. It was just something that I was doing and suddenly clicked. But this is more or less it. And you can see that there is some color variation. And I'm dealing with violets and blacks. But again, you will see that ultramarine on top of his thigh. And that is creating an illusion of the plasticness of the clothing that he's wearing, the PPE suit. And there is also a highlight on the right hand side. And here again I'm dealing with the monitors, etc., and thinking what to put and what not to put, and this is just a discretionary matter. And there are some parts that I have missed videoing, but overall you will get a good idea. This guy is turning on the air conditioning, and his the remote control is missing at this point, but I will put it later, and you will get the most of the ideas, and even if some parts are missing in videography. And I am also trying to perfect the monitor as well. And here is some highlight on top of that wooden barrier that was put. And again, this is an afterthought, what to put there, because I always felt that my bed was a little empty. What to put there? So I thought of having a BiPAP machine over there, and I photographed one BiPAP machine, but it was in a different angle. So I had to think very hard about how to change the angle, and this is what it is. And it's just, I'm painting on top of another surface, and it's mostly black and just some highlights and middle tones. And the shadows should be distinct. And there is a pipe which was somewhat difficult to do, but I had to think very hard, and eventually I was able to create that. And here, there is some color variation in this BiPAP machine, and I'm thinking very hard which part is receiving more light, which part is receiving less light. And it was created out of thin air, so to speak. Now you can see some underneath colors that the rug that I was using to cover myself from cold. Here I'm dealing with the highlight, super highlight. Since this is such a bigger object, I'm using somewhat bigger brushes for that. Whereas the things that were in the distance were very small, appearing very small, so I had to use smaller brushes. So you need to have certain degree of brushes, and you can see that I'm putting down some knobs, etc. And this is the pipe, and it was a little bit difficult to do and needed some thinking. And this is like the finishing, and you can understand that doing this at the end of it and not being quite sure and it is going to stay there is quite a challenge, but I had to accept it. And eventually I think it paid off. Rather than having empty bed, I think it's better to have something like this to create a point of interest. Now I'll be dealing with the highlights, and I've started with the top section because that is receiving the maximum amount of light, and the underneath section will have reflected light, and these are super highlights, just spots and nothing more, and some definition with blackish paint. And here is the final touch with some straight highlighting and slight bit of correction to the shape. And this the rod that I have in front of the bed is receiving phthalo blue in the shadows, and the super highlights are pure white. And this is another super highlight. So this is the shot of the final painting, and it's been done, and quite a lot of detail that was there, and sometimes it's mind-boggling, but you can see that in the end it looks all beautiful and very attractive as well. So if you haven't seen the part 1 and part 2 of the making of this painting, then please do so on YouTube. And if you like this video, then please click the like button and also subscribe for future videos. If you have any queries, then ask them in the comment section below, and check out my website customandfineart.com for more paintings. I thank you for your time. Take care.